Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our September Madison, Milwaukee Downtown Exchange. This is our virtual event series where we invite speakers from the two cities to share ideas on how the regions can work together for greater collaboration, growth, and investment. Today, we are talking about literally connecting the two cities. We are discussing the potential extension of Amtrak's Hiawatha passenger rail train from Milwaukee to Madison. I'm Jason Nostrup, president of Downtown Madison, Inc., and we are grateful to be partnering for our third year now with our friends in Milwaukee downtown. We're going to hear from their president and CEO, Beth Weirick, here in just a minute. But we want to thank our sponsors before we begin. They are the ones that make this event happen. Our major series sponsor, our friends at Reinhardt, and our supporting series sponsors, Bolt and Wipfli. We're going to hear first from friend to DMI, an attorney and associate at Reinhardt, Joya Wodarczyk. Joya, how are you this morning?
I am great, Jason. Excuse me. Yeah, I'm doing well. So thank you. So like Jason said, my name is Joya Wodarczyk. I'm a real estate attorney with Reinhardt in our Madison office. Reinhardt is a full service law firm with multiple offices, including in Madison and Milwaukee. And we are a proud sponsor of DMI's in Milwaukee Downtown's Madison and Milwaukee Downtown Exchange. So as we all can kind of continue to evolve with our downtowns, Reinhardt is committed to assisting our clients and communities and sparking collaboration as we continue to grow with our changing landscape that surrounds us. So on behalf of Reinhardt, I would like to really thank you for being here in the morning and supporting our downtowns. And so I'm going to make this short and turn it over to Jason so we can hear from our panelists to see how we can start today's conversation about kind of continuing to grow Madison, Milwaukee with the Amtrak Hiawatha passenger train. So thank you, Jason.
Well, thank you, Joya. We really appreciate all you do for us in Madison and obviously a strong contingent in Milwaukee as well. Next up, we're going to hear from Mike Brasser, who's the Vice President of National Healthcare at Bolt Companies. And Bolt has been with us since the beginning for the Madison Milwaukee Exchange. Mike, good morning. And I love your actual authentic downtown background, my friend.
Yeah,
How are you,
yeah,
Mike?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much, Jason. Yeah, this isn't a wallpaper, so it's worked out well today. So as Jason said, I'm Mike Brasser with the Bolt Company. I serve as Vice President of National Healthcare, but also focus closer to home, helping with leadership within our central operations in Madison and Milwaukee. And behalf of Bolt, we're a proud sponsor of BMI in Milwaukee downtown. And for those of you unfamiliar with Bolt, just give a real quick overview. Bolt is a 135-year-old family-managed, employee-owned construction company with deep roots in Wisconsin. We have 18 offices nationwide, and 7 of those offices are located throughout Wisconsin, with 2 of our largest in Madison and Milwaukee. And we really help our clients meet their commercial construction needs by bringing collaborative teams together and providing innovative solutions in diverse markets that you all work in, such as education, healthcare, industrial life science, energy, and automotive. And given our 2 offices in Madison and Milwaukee, and the fact that I started in my hometown of Madison today, and I'm now sitting in downtown Milwaukee, I'm really interested in today's topic and hearing more about the extension of the Hiawatha line between our 2 great cities. So thank you to DMI, thank you to Milwaukee Downtown for your collaboration hosting today's discussion.
Well, thank you, Mike. Well, hopefully, if our conversation goes well, you'll be on a train the next time you make that commute.
That'd be great. Traffic was tough.
Well, thank you, Mike, and the team at Bolt. Thank you to the team at Reinhardt and to Wipfli as well. And our partner on this is our good friends in Milwaukee downtown. And we've got Beth Weirick here today. Talk about all things that are happening in Milwaukee, and I'll talk about Madison. We'll give some updates before we get to our panelists. Beth, how are you this morning?
Doing really well. Thanks so much. I first want to say Matt Dorner sends greetings to everybody. He's really sad that he's missing this webinar today, but he's so excited because this afternoon we're breaking ground for downtown's first dog park at 3 p.m. So I wish everybody could hop on the train from Madison and get here in time for that, but you might have to hop in your car. But Matt would like to extend the invitation to everybody, and after the groundbreaking, we'll go for a cold beer at Explorium Brew Pub. But good to see you, Jason. Thank you so much for everything that you do. I think today's conversation is so appropriate because I know your organization just recently finished its long-term planning. We recently completed our Connecting MKE 2040 plan, which launched us into our organization's 5-year strategic plan. And I know your plan and our plan really focused on building more cohesive, competitive and resilient connection options, which of course the conversation that we're going to have today and hearing from our panelists about connecting our communities and building a stronger, more resilient, more competitive region is really going to be beneficial. So I thank you for putting this together. I thank our sponsors. I thank our panelists, because not only are we building stronger downtowns, we're building a stronger, more competitive, resilient, innovative region. And I'm so excited about this because I feel like we've been talking about this for decades.
Yes, I think we have. I mean, about a dozen years ago, we were very close to having a train connecting the two cities. But this is a subject that is on the front burner and so important for our downtowns. You know, it's the commitment of both downtown Madison Inc. and Milwaukee downtown to create stronger connections between the two largest cities in Wisconsin. We have so many commonalities, but we also have parts that, you know, maybe Madison does better, the Milwaukee does better. And if you create both of those together, you're going to create a much stronger economic region for our entire state. And transportation connections matter. And we've seen the success of the Hiawatha, the current existing Hiawatha line. You know, Beth, that the Hiawatha line between Chicago and Milwaukee has been fantastic for the economic success in Milwaukee, hasn't it?
Oh, it's been tremendous. I look at it just from a jobs perspective. The families that choose to live in Milwaukee, but perhaps one member of the family works in Chicago a couple of days a week, it really enhances the quality of life and that connectivity. But then, of course, the other thing that we see, and we know we've hosted recently a very large convention here in Milwaukee. But people love the concept that they can come to Milwaukee and they can access a large city like Chicago in 90 minutes, doorstep to doorstep. And, you know, that kind of connectivity, again, Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison will only make us more competitive as a region. And I know it helps Peggy Williams-Smith as she's selling Milwaukee as a destination. It certainly helps all of us from an investment perspective. And when you look at the collaborations between our innovation, our tech hubs, our universities, our employers, it really is a great asset. And then, of course, selfishly, I can't help but just be a little bit wishing that this train would have been in place when my daughter was going to school at UW-Madison, right? Because those night games were a little tough to get to and back to Milwaukee sometimes, and hopping on a train would have been great. But I'm happy for all the parents that will get to enjoy it as we move forward.
Well, you know, we are super excited about the potential train, and we're here. We've got two excellent panelists with us today to discuss this subject. Before we get into the panelists, though, we will have time for question and answer from our audience. So if you have questions, please either put them in the chat or in the Q&A function of this Zoom session. So please send in the questions, and our panelists will answer those questions at the end. All right, we've got two panelists today. First up, we're going to hear from Arun Rao, who is the director of network development for Amtrak. And followed by Arun Rao, we've got Liz Callan, a senior transportation planner with the city of Madison. We're going to begin with Arun, who's going to set the stage from an Amtrak perspective about what's sort of happening in the larger Midwest with Amtrak and the details of this line. And then we'll get into some questions. Liz is going to discuss what could happen in Madison. And then again, at the end, we're going to have time for your questions. Arun, it's good to see you this morning. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing great and super excited to be here. Really appreciate the invitation.
Perfect. The floor is yours, my friend, to set the stage for what we're going to discuss and get into the questions later on today.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much again. I'm Arun Rao. I'm Director of Network Development at Amtrak for the central 1/3 of the country. And in network development, we work with states as they go through the process to develop new routes, enhance routes. We also have our own route developments going on through Amtrak. So it's a very exciting time. I come from 2 years ago, I was at the Wisconsin Department of Transportation. I was a passenger rail manager there, and I was contracting with Amtrak for the Hiawatha service. So very excited to be here. I just wanted to start by just giving a quick overview. Obviously, I think most people are familiar with Amtrak, but we connect 500 plus destinations in 46 states, District of Columbia, and 3 Canadian provinces. We operate over 300 trains per day, 21,400 route miles, serving 28.6 million customers in FY23. We're going to reach well over that in FY24, targeting at 32.8 million, which would be a new record, even higher than pre-COVID. We operate on 30 plus host railroads, so that's freight railroads across the country. There's also some stretches of railroad that are owned by Amtrak, and 23,000 plus employees, and we are growing. So we have 3 business lines. If you look on the map to the right, 3 business lines at Amtrak. One is our long distance routes that are in blue that crisscross the country, east to west, north to south, like the Empire Builder here in Wisconsin. And then the Northeast Corridor and the state supported services, which I'm going to talk just briefly, quickly about. Those are in red on the map. And the state supported services are routes that are less than 750 miles. They require states and Amtrak to use a methodology for allocating the operating costs of those routes, so short distance corridors, among the states and Amtrak. Those routes, those short distance trains, need a partnership agreement with the state or other entity and Amtrak for the operation of those services, where then the state or other entity contract with Amtrak and fund the operating support needed for those services. So we have 28 state-supported services across the country and 21 state and local partners. And Borealis is Wisconsin's newest state-supported service, and we're super excited about this. It started on May 21st. It was a long process and journey to get that going on the WISDOT side and on the Amtrak side, and the other state partners, Minnesota DOT and Illinois. But it all came together on May 21st with this new service, which has exceeded all of Amtrak's forecasts in ridership and revenue. And the forecasts showed a very positive, I think, ridership and revenue, but we have blown that out of the water. We're 15% higher ridership than expected. I think this demonstrates that the demand for this on corridors like Milwaukee to Chicago, Milwaukee, Twin Cities, and that people will respond with more frequencies, improved service, particularly the regional services. Wisconsin Department of Transportation submitted and was selected for several corridors to be put into FRA's new Corridor ID program. The Corridor ID program, Corridor Identification Program, through FRA is the mechanism to start channeling all those infrastructure bill funds, 66 billion for passenger rail, intercity passenger rail, channeling all those funds to the states. And the Corridor ID program, covers the initial steps of doing that. It creates a pipeline of projects for that funding. So WISDOT submitted several corridors for the Corridor ID consistent with their state rail plan. One was the Twin Cities, Madison, Milwaukee, Chicago via Eau Claire initial phase, via Eau Claire. And an initial phase of that, would be Hiawatha extension to Madison, Hiawatha extension to Green Bay, and then enhanced corridors, increasing that Hiawatha service to 10 round trips daily, and Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago, looking at a second additional state-supported frequency in the future. So Hiawatha extension to Madison. So, there's, I'll go back to the Corridor ID program for a moment. There's 69 corridors across the country that have been selected in the Corridor ID program. This corridor really stands out as one of the more potentially higher performing corridors in the country, and feasible corridors for a lot of reasons. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's extending the successful Hiawatha service, 85 miles to the west, relatively short distance. And you're adding high ridership origin and destination pairs to that Hiawatha service. So you're adding Madison, Milwaukee, Madison, Chicago. that is really going to have a significant ridership bump for the entire, Midwest network and for the Hiawatha service. And Madison, similar to Milwaukee, Madison's really a textbook market for Amtrak, with large research university, state capital, all of the industries, the IT, biotech, insurance industries, and the high walkability, bikeability, and very high existing transit usage in Madison. And those combination of factors that we've seen in other parts of the country and other places, similar places, that really the ridership really responds there when we add service. So rail can leverage as well the Madison and Milwaukee business, educational, and tourism linkages, and that's been like no other mode can. It's on a train, on Amtrak services, we'll have trip time competitive with the auto, but it's really about productive time. It's your own time. It's not lost time. It's when you're on the train, you can work, you can rest, you can grab something to eat. There's no need to stop for restrooms, spacious facilities on board. And that really is, goes beyond, comfort, and really translates into something that's very important for the business community. And as we've seen with the Hiawatha service between Milwaukee and Chicago. So a little bit of history and where we're at now. But first, just to take a quick look at the corridor, Milwaukee west on this Canadian Pacific to Watertown. That's the same route as and the Brookfield and Oconomowoc dots you see there. That's not; those are from the previous project. But that Canadian Pacific Rail, that's the same corridor that the Empire Builder currently runs on and the Borealis currently runs on. So we'd be adding more trains there to Watertown, and then from Watertown, we get on to the track that is owned by the Rail Transit Commission. It's publicly owned. It was acquired by WSDOT, and it's operated by Wisconsin and Southern. There's about one freight train per day, more or less, that operates on that route. Needs significant upgrades, though, for passenger service. So going back to the previous project that many would be familiar with to expand rail service to Madison. So in 2004, there was an improved environmental to move that forward, and an $810 million grant received in 2009. And in May 2010, final design started. It's significant work. But in November 2010, the project was canceled. However, in 2021, infrastructure bill passed. We're at a different time, a different moment, and this corridor was again selected for the FRA Corridor Identification Program with WSDOT in the lead. And it's very important that this is a different project. This is a new project. This is a different project, and we are moving forward. So development process for new routes in general, you have the state rail plans, but then you have the service development plan, which is step one of that corridor ID program. You see the legend, the yellow dot, that's a corridor ID program, a federal program that covers the 90% of the cost of doing a service development plan. That's just getting started with scope, schedule, and budget right now. WSDOT is working on all of that. And then preliminary engineering and environmental, that's the second step of the corridor ID program. That's 80% funded by the Federal Railroad Administration. Then that's where the corridor ID program leaves off, and then you're in a pipeline for final design and construction funding for the route. And then the operation, there's a federal program, which is very, very important, that covers a significant portion of the operating support needed during the first 6 years of service. So it really reduces the burden on the states for having to cover on the state's budget, for having to cover the operating support for those first few years of service. That's a big difference from back in 2010. So getting back at the economic impacts of investments like these, you have the end users, the travel time savings, the reliability in transportation, the travel cost savings, particularly for the business community, and induced travel demand and the economic impacts of that. And from a transportation network and a societal standpoint, you're building connections between communities, lower emissions, increased travel safety. Safety that's another very important factor here. That this is a very safe mode of transportation, safer than than other modes out there that are available to everyone today, and building resilience and redundancy in the transportation system. From an economic development standpoint, regional economic integration, of course, access to broader markets, sustainable income growth, and local development. Trying to go quickly here, just so we have plenty of time, and Liz has some time. So case study here in the Borealis. I think the main point you just to highlight is there's $12.3 million in construction costs in Wisconsin. Just those costs in Wisconsin are going to yield $35 million in short-term construction benefits for this Borealis. Similarly with the operating cost, there is a annual operating cost that was estimated for the first year, 7.2 million. Wisconsin's share would be 3.6. That's going to yield 25 million in annual economic benefits in Wisconsin from those operations. So $3.6 million operating share, 25 million economic benefits. This is a very conservative economic impact model. Another case study is Missouri River Runner. That's the St. Louis to Kansas City 2 round trips corridor. $12 million annual operating support, which is significantly higher than anything we see in Wisconsin. But that yields all of those benefits, economic benefits you see in that bottom box. There's very significant benefits to the state of Missouri. And this case was brought before the state legislature of Missouri that was hesitating on funding the full operating support. The communities, 10 communities got together, rallied around, and did this, and the Missouri DOT did this economic benefits analysis. And this was taken to the legislature. Legislature passed the funding, and Missouri is moving forward and is successfully operating those 2 daily round trips. Getting back to the transit-oriented development, sort of land development focus here of new stations, great example would be Normal, Illinois. They invested $46.8 million in a project to build a new station and a new downtown core there that you see in the photo, which resulted in award-winning downtown redesign, 18 district structures, and it spurred millions of dollars in private sector development with new hotels, children's museum, residential development, and much more. Really a great thing to see if you're able to see that and the impact there. So wrapping things up here, great. I love that photo on the left with our very own Governor Evers and Amtrak CEO there cutting the ribbon in La Crosse for the new Borealis service in May. But securing, past this is securing state and local funding is key. We have this federal program, but we need to match money, and that's project development all the way through construction and the ongoing operating support after. Generating support, the strong business community support and the involvement is what is going to lead to that state and local support that's needed. That is the key. That was key for the Borealis. That's probably one of the most important things. It's going to take a village in order to get this done. And then finally conducting statewide engagement and communicating how the benefits are to statewide and to other communities in the corridor like Waukesha County and Watertown. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Ron, thank you. That was a fantastic sort of overlay of what's happening with this issue. Obviously, we're talking about the extension of the Hiawatha line between Milwaukee and Madison. Very important to both of our downtowns. Next, we're going to bring in Liz Callan, a senior transportation planner with the city of Madison. I know she has some slides as well about what's happening in Madison. And for a question I want to ask you, Liz, is, what is happening in Madison? What is Madison doing to prepare for the potential extension of the Hiawatha line? And a second question, which I think you'll answer in your slide deck, is where could the station be in Madison? Liz, it's good to see you this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, and thank you for having me as well. This is an exciting topic and one that I think we've heard in Madison a ton of interest. So I'm always happy to talk more about it. So in Madison, what we've started to do is in concert with WISTOT's effort to study the corridor and study the extension and look at other aspects of that, including service development and planning, as we are working on a station location study that will feed into that process. So that's really what we're working on right now. And we are actually in the kind of final stages of that. And we hope to release that report here soon. But again, that will feed into that larger process. And then Madison is also thinking about how can we just support the overall process that WSDOT is really leading, and how can we connect with other communities along the route that would also benefit from this. So that's something that we'll be doing throughout the length of this whole process. And I think this webinar even is kind of part of that overall effort. So just an update on the Madison station study here. 1 second, I lost my mouse. There we go. So we have narrowed down, we looked at a bunch of areas in Madison that could be feasible for a passenger rail station. And we've narrowed it down initially to 8 sites within the city. And now we're at the point where we're kind of finalizing the final screening for that. And looking at really the top few sites that we think would have the highest likelihood of success for a station in Madison. So what does that mean? So first of all, we of course need the train logistics to work, right? So we need the track to be able to come in and serve a station. We need enough space for a platform, and we need the train to then be able to continue on its route. So initially, as Arun mentioned, potentially having an initial extension to Madison, and then in the future, north along to the Twin Cities via Eau Claire. So just thinking about that overall route and what might make sense, and really just future-proofing a station as well. And so we are looking at narrowing down the site locations, and we do have some front contenders. I will say Monona Terrace, an area near Blair Street and Livingston Street, and some of the area near Johnson Street are kind of the top contenders in our screening right now. We're still finalizing what that will look like. But our plan is really to, now that this study is almost complete, we have more information about these sites. But we're also wanting to wait for WSDOT to move forward with their process a little bit more before we make a final decision on our site. So we don't want to necessarily get ahead of the planning and service development process that is now underway. So just a little bit more about Madison's station priorities. I think it really feeds into a lot of what Arun talked about with some of those case studies, because we're thinking about both, again, the train access and operational needs, the station program elements, but we're also thinking about things like placemaking and economic development potential, because we know that, this is a new station that obviously Madison does not have Amtrak service right now. So it's just a great opportunity to really create and cultivate a great place around transportation, but then also other relevant uses, and also making sure that people have the connectivity they need to really make this an attractive service that people want to use, and that is really convenient and easy for people to use, in terms of both residents of Madison to use it to get to Milwaukee, Chicago, eventually up to the Twin Cities, and then other communities along the route, but also for visitors who are coming here and who can then step off a train at a station and then kind of get to where they need to go really easily. So that can happen in a combination of ways, in terms of proximity to those destinations, but then also in terms of connectivity from a multimodal perspective. So we have, as you mentioned, a bus rapid transit service that is going to be opening here later this month. So we're thinking about connectivity to that line. We're thinking about those bike ped connections. And then we're thinking about just the other visitor and kind of business destinations around each of the station areas we're considering. And so, yeah, I know that you have a couple other questions as well to ask. So that is the length of my slideshow today, but I'm happy to answer more about kind of what we're thinking here in Madison.
Yeah, thank you, Liz, very much. There's a lot happening here in Madison. I think a couple of notes we want to make sure that people know: the Milwaukee station will continue to be that excellent intermodal station on St. Paul, which was built not too long ago. That will be the connection to as well. And I think we should be transparent as an organization. Downtown Madison Inc. has taken a position that is favorable in endorsing the Monona Terrace as the station for the passenger rail in Madison. So that is a position that DMI has taken. So I should be very transparent with you. But Liz, I want to start with you. The first question is, why is it so important for Madison? And Arun sort of spoke about the economic impact, the development, why this is important. But specifically for the city of Madison, why is the city so interested in bringing passenger rail back to our capital city?
Yeah, I think the economic piece is a huge part of it. I think we have a lot of visitors coming to Madison from a lot of the communities that would be along the route. So it's a really nice fit. But we're also thinking about sustainability, and we're also thinking about just providing more options for people. So talking to folks that are involved in our visitor and convention bureau, how this would be part of an overall experience coming to Madison, instead of your experience starting when you park your car or you get to your hotel. It would start when you get on the train, and making that kind of an enhanced overall experience. We also have a lot of business to business connections in mind when we're thinking about passenger rail. So obviously, with the two largest cities in the state, we have a lot of business to business connections. And I think, Beth, you refer to this as well, having the ability for people, whether it's someone who's living in one city and working in another, or there's multiple offices between the two cities, just having the ability to make that connection not only easy and conveniently, but also being able to be productive while you're on the train. And so I think we're thinking about all of those things. I think for a very long time, the residents in Madison have wanted this connection. And I think it's also about the regional connection to the broader Midwest. So being able to connect easier to Chicago opens up the door to connect to many, many other places via train. You saw the map that Arun showed. I think it's about that as well. Also a lot of Madison and Minnesota connections. So a lot of connections with the universities in both of those in both of our communities. So I think there's just a lot of synergies. I think it makes a lot of sense. And we're just looking forward to supporting this effort as much as we can.
Ron, I want to, ask that sort of similar question to you and sort of lay on the overall larger Midwest picture of why this connection is so important for the Midwest. Liz just brought it up, right? The connections between Minneapolis are deep and strong. It's my personal opinion that the reciprocity agreements between the universities, one of the greater economic development tools that we have in our two states for the last, several generations. Why, from an Amtrak perspective, is it so important that we continue to build more infrastructure and more lines in the Midwest? Because it's been very East Coast centric, obviously, New York, DC, Philadelphia, cities like that. Why is it important to build this powerful infrastructure here in the Midwest, and how important will that be economically for the Midwest, particularly when you're connecting four of the biggest cities in Minneapolis, Madison, Milwaukee, and Chicago?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And so this is really, we're here talking about Milwaukee, Chicago, but it's really about, as Jason said, the larger Midwest network, the Midwest mega region. So, you mentioned the Northeast corridor. That's a great corridor that's developed, but there's all these mega regions around the country that Amtrak sees as a huge opportunity to develop improved regional intercity passenger rail networks. And this started back in the early 2000s with the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative in the Midwest, which was a joint planning effort by the states. And there was building out this regional network in phases. And the first phase had the Madison extension. And the reason for that is because that was one identified as probably the highest performing segment to start out with, and that would carry forward the future segments. But so, this connection, putting Madison on the Amtrak Midwest network is really about Madison to St. Louis. It's Madison to Ann Arbor, Madison to Detroit. All corridors, across the Midwest where we have already multiple frequencies, very strong corridors, speeds in some cases up to 110 miles an hour on the Chicago, St. Louis, and on the Detroit route. So it's really integrating, this part of Wisconsin into the Midwest regional network, and also the national network in Chicago through connections in Chicago. We are working on extending one of the Detroit trains to Windsor, Ontario, to connect with Via Rail Canada to Toronto, for example. So this is going to, an extension to Madison. There would be an opportunity to connect all the way to Ontario and into Canada. Many opportunities like that. So it's really about building on the success of the Hiawatha, expanding that Midwest regional network. The Midwest mega region has a GDP similar to major economies around the world, and we need the ground transportation linkages or transportation options to support that. And we think that intercity passenger rail service is a key to that.
You talk about extensions and expansion around the question. Next question for you is, is connecting to those other cities. What is the timeline for some of these other projects, right? You've talked about extension up to Green Bay, extension into Eau Claire, and back into the Twin Cities. Obviously, the Borealis is up and running and doing successfully well, right? 15-16% above what you even projected right at the beginning here. What's the time frame for extension services to cities like Eau Claire, to Green Bay, and creating that larger Midwest network?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a journey going through the process. There's multiple steps. As I mentioned, I was referring to the Corridor ID program. Just the service development plan and environmental and preliminary engineering steps of that program. That can take 3 years, right? To get through those steps. And then, you go into final design and construction. That can take another 3 or 4 years. So, 7-8 years for a lot of these corridors. In some cases, it's going to be longer than that. In some cases, it's going to be shorter than that. We think that the Madison extension can be shorter than that because of a number of factors. But there are some corridors that are going to take longer to develop. With the Madison extension, again, it's those future corridors are really going to support that. But ridership with that Madison extension, it's going to hit the ground running because of a number of factors that are already in place, connecting Madison to Chicago and connecting to all of those existing strong Midwest corridors that we are already operating.
Just a reminder, we do have availability for question and answer here in a few minutes. We're going to get to the questions that are already in the Q&A, but if you have questions, please enter them into the Q&A or into the chat. Liz, question right back, basically same question for you. Best case scenario, when will we see passenger rail service in a station in Madison?
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard for the city of Madison to really put a timeline on it because it's really a larger effort that involves a lot of partners. So I think, as Arun said, I think the 7 to 8 year time frame. We've been, using the early 2030s as a rough timeline, an estimate timeline based on what we've talked with Amtrak and WSDOT about. But I think a key part of this is to keep that progress moving forward with that Corridor ID program. So that's really as Arun said, that's the pipeline to get into the actual design and construction phase. So just to kind of reiterate that that's really kind of a planning pipeline. So it's really FRA's way to help make sure that these corridors kind of have their ducks in a row before they start giving out, frankly, the big dollars to really build these things. And I think it's smart. It makes a lot of sense. It's helpful for people to understand the process. And I think the city of Madison is really looking to see what can we do to help this process move along, but then also how can we partner with those other communities? So connecting with Milwaukee and then connecting with those other communities between Madison and Milwaukee to make sure that we're doing what we can to support the effort. And again, there's different kind of milestones along the route, and there will be some local match requirements along the way. Right now, the funding that WSDOT has to start is 100% federally funded. So it's really an opportunity to take advantage of that and leverage as much of the federal funding as we possibly can. And so I think that's what we're also trying to do is how can we leverage as much of this federal funding that's out there? How can we do it in a way that really minimizes the impact on local government budgets and really kind of look at innovative ways to make those local matches happen? So I think that's something we're thinking about as well in Madison.
If I could add,
yeah, please, of course.
Yeah, it's I obviously you hear these timeframes and they sound long, but as Liz said, there are these critical milestones that require state budget action, And so there's a need for really everyone to stay engaged and doing outreach, particularly the business community, to make sure these steps can move forward, these milestones can happen. So just wanted to, throw that out there.
It's a great point. Actually, one of our first questions from our Q&A is how we can support. We'll get to that in 1 second. But the last question we have is, and I want to bring Beth in on this topic, is why and how important are this is train extension to the downtowns, right? We're two downtown organizations. I'm gonna start with Beth. Why is it important for Milwaukee's downtown to have more train service, including to Madison or to Green Bay or to wherever, for the health and vitality and vibrancy of Milwaukee's downtown?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jason, for that question. It's interesting for me just because I've been fortunate enough to be around for several decades, right? Well, multiple decades, but nonetheless, all the conversations that we have, again, about the importance of creating this mega region, kind of, city leadership, state leadership, when we're talking about connecting these states and these cities, it's like check your ego at the door, right? Dig deep. I have so much gratitude for the tenacity of our local leaders, our state leaders, the leadership at WISDOT, the leadership at Amtrak, because whenever a barrier appears, there is always the willingness to continue to push forward because we recognize at the end of the day, no matter how sometimes things can get polarized, we're talking about creating a higher quality of life. We're talking about attracting investment, significant investment to this mega region that we're creating, and to have that vision and not be impeded by the barriers that appear. And I'm so grateful that we're taking advantage of the federal dollars that are here. But as we know, we've got to be ready as communities with that match, with that advocacy. So when you talk about it, to your local community, for our residents who are already here and why these investments are important, it is to enhance their quality of life, to make it convenient for them, not only to access arts, culture, sports, entertainment for themselves, for their family, for their friends in that immediate city, but that strong connection to this mega region around us and in these other great cities. And of course, it's just a pragmatic, logical approach that occurs then. We create this environment that is strong in providing this quality of life. And thank God our communities don't have to start from scratch of addressing that. All we're doing is providing a really convenient, accessible means, not only to what is here in our growing downtown population and workforce, but what is also available and convenient and accessible in these other communities, including Chicago, including Madison, including Minneapolis. So from my perspective, it's a no-brainer, right? I mean, we're going to continue to attract investment. We know our access to fresh water, Midwest friendly, all of these assets that we have. All we're going to do is leverage those together. And I'm just a big believer in the dynamic laws of prosperity. And this region will continue to grow and be stronger than ever.
Well, here, Beth, and I would add on two more items. You're seeing significant research about younger generations traveling significantly less in their vehicles, right? So vehicle miles traveled is down significantly for generations. We saw whispering in a few other studies saying young folks are making decisions on where they're going to live based on transit and transportation networks, and trains matter. Right now, Madison has the highest proportion of Gen Z talent moving to our city in any city in the country. Part of that is because you have good access to Chicago, you have good access to Minneapolis, and importantly, good access to Milwaukee. And then the second is, we're really seeing this movement, and Beth and I are studying this. Next week, Beth and I will be in Seattle at the International Downtown Association, hearing about a new concept called, these mega regions or these mega downtowns. And there are a handful of them in the world, and one of them is based around Chicago. And you can see the sort of economic power emanating from that, but we need to create those connections. All right, we're going to open it up for question and answer from our audience. If you have a question, put it in the Q&A and we will ask it. And Arun kind of got to this question, and so did Liz earlier. How can we all help? So thank you, our good friend Trudy Watt, who asks, thanks for the presentation and everyone's hard work to create more connectivity in our region. How can aspiring riders and transit advocates in both cities support these important projects? Any panelist can answer that question. Or no panelists are going to
I
answer.
can,
Okay,
yeah,
somebody,
no,
okay.
no, I can kick it off, and I think uh, other local entities, whether it's advocates or community groups, et cetera, um, keeping that discussion going and keeping this on high on the radar screen for local city councils, as well as their state lawmakers and even county lawmakers, is absolutely critical. There just needs to be, and really also, I think, a coalition of communities. If Madison and Milwaukee, Watertown and Waukesha County could get together and form this coalition around this corridor, business coalition to advocate to decision makers to continue to keep this moving forward and funded. That's something that we haven't had, back in, really to that extent, back in 2010, for example. And I think that would be really important to keeping this moving forward to make this a reality.
Liz, and from the Madison perspective, what do you all need? What support can you garner from the community to help make this successful?
Yeah, I think the biggest things are to stay engaged in the process and to continue to talk to people in other communities or people in some of those communities along the route, thinking about how can we connect with our state and local electeds to talk about why this is important. Obviously, we talk a lot about the economic impact. But really, when you think about a return on investment on a transportation project, any time where you have a new connection is when you really see the biggest impacts. So having an existing connection that you're improving, let's say you're saving some travel time on a congested highway, for example, there's going to be some benefits to that, but they're not going to be nearly as strong as a project where you're creating a new connection like these extensions would be doing. So I think thinking in that sense and thinking about how this really could be transformative to all of the communities along the route, and just communicating that and staying engaged in the process, I think is really the best way to do that. And like Arun said, I think working on building that coalition is something we are certainly trying to engage on, and just making sure that we have a diverse group of voices at the table, because we do see a lot of different users and beneficiaries from these extensions that are being proposed.
Is that okay? I also just want to add, and I think it's really important, Aaron, you mentioned this, Liz, you mentioned this. I think it's so important in some of our smaller communities along the route to really be able to fully understand the benefits and the prosperity that will be brought to those communities. Change is always so transitional for us. So whatever we can do to help educate citizens in those communities about the benefits, the economic benefits and the quality of life benefits, because sometimes change can create a little bit of fear. And so I think whatever all of us can do from an educational and advocacy perspective, not only in our own communities, but family members and friends that we have in communities along this pathway, there is a little bit of fear sometimes about creating a very magnetic cosmopolitan mega region. It's like, there some people might look at it differently. So whatever we can do, I think, to utilize our influence to help people really understand that will help with these baby steps along the way and eliminate some of that fear and look forward to really what we can become as a region and still all of us enjoy our quality of life.
That's a great point. It feeds right into the next question from our good friend Dave Benferrato, who says, great meeting topic. What are the planned stops on the Amtrak's Hiawatha train between Madison and Milwaukee? You sort of hinted at it, Run, in one of the slides, but I think to answer the question, the best thing, as Beth just said, the best thing Madison and Milwaukee leaders can do is fire up interest in potential route expansion at the stops between and those local leaders. Keep up the great and outreach work. Run, what stations are we planning besides Madison and Milwaukee?
Well, that is really going to be determined through the service development plan process that WSDOT's going to be preparing to start. That's going to look at all of that. But we do know, I mean, for certain that in all of the plans and in all of the WSDOT materials and everything that Amtrak has looked at, that Watertown would be a stop, and that's an important community. And for a community, like Watertown, what does it mean for Watertown? Watertown is a great community. It's not directly on the interstate. Adding this multiple rail service trains per day into the center of that community with a one-seat ride to Milwaukee, to Madison, to Chicago, to the network, will have profound impacts. And communicating that will be really important. I mean, it's sort of like putting a mini interchange in the middle of the community without all the negative impacts that come with an interchange. But in terms of the other stops, I think from Amtrak's perspective, we think one stop in Waukesha County, sort of a Milwaukee suburban beltway stop that can capture, all of or much of Waukesha County, is something that's important, in addition to Watertown. But I think we see sort of like two intermediate stops between downtown Madison and downtown Milwaukee as being favorable. But again, that's WSDOT's process, and the service development plan is going to determine that.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question is from Chris Ott, who's with the High Speed Rail Alliance, a good friend of downtown Madison. Thanks for the great presentations. Speaking of the same subject, Watertown is on the map for this service and is also on the existing Empire Builder Borealis line. Would it make sense to build this station there sooner rather than later, to build relationships and support from the part of the state to help get statewide support needed to get the whole project done? You sort of kind of answered the question, but interesting about building an actual station now. What are your thoughts around on that question?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And that's something that's been raised too, even in the context of the Empire Builder. I think the challenge there is we do have, those are sort of longer distance routes, and travel time is a consideration. And the existing Watertown's not an existing station on either of those services. And the existing stops are in Wisconsin, that part of the state, are somewhat close, are very close, like Columbus, Portage are very close. And so there's a on the existing long distance service on the Empire Builder, I think adding a stop anywhere along that route would be a big challenge. For the existing Borealis, I don't know of any plans for that. But I think having Watertown as part of this, Madison extension of the Hiawatha really highlights that this particular corridor, is about much more than just adding Madison, right? It's about communities like Watertown and in Waukesha County, and having those connected with this corridor in particular, with this expansion, I think is going to help generate the support to move this forward in order to get this done. But that's a great question. Don't have a great answer for it at this point, but appreciate it.
That's good not to sometimes have those answers yet. Question for Liz is, you kind of inferred but didn't give a timeline. Is there a more definitive timeline for the station location to be selected and finalized in Madison?
Yeah, so what we've decided to do with the study that we're finishing up right now is really kind of flesh out a few options. So we have kind of what we feel are sort of the top options in Madison, and we've been able to get a lot more information about those sites, kind of set up preliminary site plans for what those sites would look like, and just think through what kind of almost the implementation process would look like. So we kind of have a plan if one, depending on which site ends up moving forward. But we've decided that we don't want to prematurely make a decision on a site for a couple of reasons. One is that, we don't want to get too far ahead of WSDOT's process. So they are working on scoping, schedule, and budget right now. We want to wait until they get into the planning phase, which will kick off the environmental process and make sure that the Madison station is kind of wrapped into that larger process. And also just from a logistics standpoint, if land, for example, needs to be acquired, we want to make sure that that's done at a time frame where we feel confident in the overall timeline of the effort, and that it can be applied as appropriate, and as we're able to do that, toward the local match for the overall effort. So thinking about how can construction and even the design process be part of a local match for the planning, design, and eventual construction of the overall extension. So those are a couple of reasons, but we do plan to release that study here in the next several weeks. I don't have an exact date right now. We are just finishing up the analysis and just wanting to make sure we're documenting all. We got a lot of public comment. We want to make sure we're incorporating all of that as appropriate. And then when that is released, we'll continue to support the effort and make a decision a little bit further along in the overall WISTOP process. So probably in the later 2025, maybe 2026, early 2026 timeframe is when we think that timing will probably be here.
Excellent. And the last question, I think I know the answer to this, is how long will it take from Madison to Milwaukee? Arun, I think your slide said 90 minutes-ish, 90 minutes, correct? Oh, you're muted. Still muted.
Yeah, that's just very conceptual, just to give a conservative example of what it might be. Obviously, that's going to be determined in the service development plan as well, because it's related to what the maximum speed is going to be, which will impact the average speed, which will determine the travel time. So, the options out there, are anywhere from, for the new part of the corridor where Amtrak doesn't currently operate, between Watertown and Madison, what's the maximum speed is going to be there? Is it going to be our standard, 79 miles an hour? Is it going to be 110 miles an hour? Those are or is it going to be 90? Those are the sort of the three options, and the service development planning is really going to determine that. But yeah, I mean, that's a good sort of conceptual estimate to go with now. It's about 90 minutes.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much to Arun Rao from Amtrak and Liz Callan from the city of Madison for helping discuss this important issue about the possible extension of the Hiawatha line from Milwaukee to Madison. Thank you all for joining us for our latest Madison Milwaukee Downtown Exchange. We want to thank our partners again. We've got Reinhardt, our major series sponsor, and our supporting series sponsors, Bolt and Whipfly. And we've got two more of these coming up later this year. The next will be on the importance of arts and music to our downtowns. And the last of the year is going to be a special panel discussion with other downtown leaders from throughout the Midwest, talking about best practices and their initiatives. Hope you can join us for those as well. But we're going to give, as always, our last word to our good friend, Beth Weirk. Beth, thank you for joining us. Any final thoughts on why rail is so important to connect our two cities?
No, I think we've said it all, but I think in a nutshell, it's just really clear to me, all this will do for all of us is build a more cohesive, competitive, and resilient region. And I thank everybody here, and I hope we can go out and multiply and spread the word and continue to be great advocates for regional connectivity. I invite all of you to our State of Downtown in Milwaukee, where we can showcase what's going on in downtown Milwaukee and talk about global trends moving forward. That will happen October 1st. So Jason, thank you for your unbelievable, amazing energy, leadership that you bring to all of us. So super grateful to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Beth. And we'll be there in October. And join us for our annual celebration, DMI's annual celebration, next Monday on September 9th at the Orpheum downtown from 4 to 7. All right, everyone have a great day, and we'll see you in our downtowns. Thank you for all the support, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye now.